Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to this JunoViewer webinar, an introduction to XML for JunoViewer users. My name is Ravi Kiran. I'm one of the team members here at Lonrix, where our mission is to help engineers make informed decisions. Without the delay, let us jump into our today's topic. This webinar is designed to give you some ground rules on using XML and its use in JunoViewer to create or update reports with a few examples. Well, in this webinar, we will be talking what's XML, structure, a basic structure of XML, and a few examples managing reports using XML in JunoViewer, followed by Q&A session. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It was published around 23 years ago, and it was designed to be a very simple text format that is both human and machine can understand. The intention at that time was to design XML to address challenges of large-scale electronic documents in mid-90s. Since then, XML is one of the most popular forms of data exchange across multiple industries and disciplines in the world of software applications. But the power of this XML is it has a very simple set of rules to represent data and structure of the data, which I will explain in my next slides. The structure of XML in this webinar, I'll be using a very simple structure, which is quite relevant to JunoViewer and how we use this in JunoViewer. And it can be a bit more complex in general, but the structure that we're going to discuss today is quite foundational. So here's a few different elements, and one element is called root element, and the other one is child and subchild. But I'll explain these again with examples in my next slides. And subchild can have, again, childs underneath, and there are no limits of how many levels of elements that can go in XML. And the other information or the information that holds in XML is called value, and another optional property that's called attribute. Usually attributes are used to define the type of data structure or the type of data that you use in XML. To the base of that XML, I'll just explain you in a very shallow example structure. So the most important point about XML is any element will have to be contained in less than and greater than symbol, and you can have child elements here, but the scope or the closing of this particular element is actually followed by less than / the same name and then greater than symbol. And when we talk about some of the real world examples, then I'll relate this with the real world scenarios, how we represent data in XML. So this is another example that under root that we add an element. It's a child element, and this is how we add attribute. So attribute could be anything, and then the value for the attribute, and this needs to be the attribute value should always be enclosed in double quotes. And again, you can have multiple subchilds, and the value will be comprised of subchild. So now this don't have to be exactly like this, and you can have value out of a child, and you can completely ignore subchild as well. In this particular example, these subchild elements becomes a value for this child element. Okay, now we'll go on to a real world example. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with this, and this is an analogy to represent the structure of XML. Just keep in mind, it always follows a tree structure in XML. It's just you flip it to the right, when you define a root and characteristics of those elements. Okay. In this case, root is the root element, and name, number, length, and direction of the road characteristics are related to that particular road are child elements. So this is our root element, which is road, and then the child elements such as name, number, length, and direction. But length says 2,500. We don't know whether it's meters or kilometers or miles or feet. So this is a classic example of how you can add attributes, which is optional again, to define or add more information to the type of data that you're representing. I just wanted to take a few seconds here to reiterate a few things that we discussed already. So XML does not limit what you wanted to put as part of this element or root element or child elements. The whole idea here is the elements comprises of the structure of the data or the type of data, the actual data value goes into that element. So that's how the XML structure works. And this is another example where my root element is network, but here I've represented multiple roads in the same network with different names, numbers, and length and direction. The power of XML is it does not dictate what goes into elements like other markup languages. For example, if you look at HTML, what goes into tags are already defined, and we have to use one of those tags. So it is completely flexible, and XML is completely flexible if we follow the basic rule set that we discussed earlier. And some points to keep in mind in the structure of this XML. Number one, we need to avoid special characters such as less than and greater than. Why? Because it is part of defining an element and closing the element as well. At end symbol, we call it ampersand symbol, that needs to be avoided. It's best practice. And single quote or apostrophe and quotation marks. And another best practice and absolutely important point is elements and attribute names can't have any spaces and special characters. It needs to be one word. But if it's a longer word, and if you wanted to add two words to be a part of element, then you can use underscores or use camel case, which is basically capital letters can start after each word without any spaces. Okay, so now we'll get into our topic for this day. How we use XML in JunoViewer. Do you know in JunoViewer, many graphs, reports, strip maps, and algorithms are controlled by XML? The reason we use XML to control how these reports are appeared on JunoViewer frontend when you use JunoViewer, we understand every road network is different with respect to the data and availability of the data as well. And a user wants to view data slightly different way depending on questions that need to be answered with JunoViewer analysis tools. So to cater for these permutations and combinations, we do not want to write a big software program for every little change. So we write a generic program, or we develop a generic feature, but the variations are always been controlled by this XML. Initially, our team used to control and change things around in XML to drive changes. When we get usually requests from a user. From a few years, we have provided an XML editor in JunoViewer where you can change some reports and strip maps if you have access to edit XML page. At the moment, this page is only available for administrators, and the changes on the setup XML page will be applied to either all of the networks under your account, or you can actually add changes to a specific network, which I will demonstrate in a few minutes. Okay, so in this demonstration, I will use JunoViewer's edit XML page in combination with one report setup, which is section analysis report, to show you a few examples. Okay. This is section analysis page, this page that I wanted to use for this demonstration example. So you can see in this drop downs, there are multiple reports were already set up. And so take it as an example, accident analysis breakdown for the last 5 years. I'll select a section. So it's showing me each year how many accidents were happen in that on that particular road, and accidents breakdown by light condition, and this is by rain condition, whether it's wet or dry, and injury types. What if I wanted to have the same report for 10 years, but I'd wanted to keep this so that I can copy paste in my other reports that I need to submit to client or use it in a different purpose? I'll show you how you can create a similar report very quickly using XML in JunoViewer. So you go to Manage, and there's a page. It's called Edit XML Setup, and I'll open this in a different tab. Okay. So just to touch base a few things here. Number one, you can have a different setups for different networks, but here for this example, I'll use all. All means when you set up a report or XML setup that's applicable to all of your networks in JunoViewer. And setup class represents different report types. For example, this virtual field inspection tool and section and few other report types. But in this example, I'll use section, which directly link to section analysis page. Okay, and now you can see here, this is accident analysis. That's the setup type. The actual report is accident analysis breakdown for the last 5 years. Now the reason I wanted to start with this is it's a very simple XML, and we can relate this to some of the examples that we discussed earlier in those slides. So here the setup is representing the root, the root element, and the other elements are basically holding the value that we need for this report to drive. In this case, I will only change years to go back. So basically, it's 5 years, but I want this report to run for 10 years. I'll go back to normal June. So here I've got a couple of options. Number one, clone current setup and edit current setup. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to clone and modify it so that I can get a new report just by adding one little change on this existing XML setup. Yeah, so clone, okay, and then successfully. Okay, so I've got my clone analysis here. It's exactly the same. It copied everything from existing accident analysis and breakdown. You see, this is the original one, and this is the new one. And I wanted to edit it so that I can change the name the way that I want it in the dropdown under section analysis. So I'll say accident analysis breakdown for last 10 years. Same thing here. And when it's edit mode, you'll see this is colors are changing. There's a few cool features available here. Let me zoom in and show you. If you click on an element, you can't change the element because that was fixed to drive those reports. But it shows open and closed tag. So that when you have a large XML, then you can see when it was open, where it was open, and it was closed as well. Okay, so in this case, I'll click here and change the number to 10. And click OK, and check and save. So check and save is first checks whether there's any error in XML setup. If there's an error, it reports it, or else it just comes with the message. As soon as we click OK, it saves, updates automatically. I'll just go back to my normal Zoom here and refresh here. Okay, so now you can see I've got a new report, accident analysis breakdown for last 10 years. Select, but I'll select my segment first. I was showing last 10 years, so we don't have data for 2020 and 2021. And the data for last 10 years, which are of course available data, that's also considered here to drive these graphs, which is light condition, rain condition, injury type. Okay, so I'll go and find a different report here. So for example, trends on Big Four, which are pretty commonly used reports. So here you're looking at NASRA, texture, mean in lane, rut mean, and screen information. I'll go and find this report and clone it and add a new report that I want, which are basically 4 different graphs, but I want different parameters on that graph. So I'll go and select the section again, and that will be under multiple trend section. As you can see here, trends on Big Four. And if you look at this one, so there's 4 parameters, there's 4 different parameters, and those 4 parameters are defined by 4 different data parameters, which are already set up. And if you want to know about our data parameters, there's a webinar that we have done on data parameters, and you can go and check video on data parameters. So what I'll do here is I'll change the data parameters so that it will have those data parameters as part of my new report. So I'll go and clone this one. So okay, and then section again, multiple trends, and this is my clone one, and I click on edit. So what I want to do here is I want 4 graphs, 2 on texture and 2 on rutting. So I'll say texture, rut, 8 years. So I'll change from, I can see here the years to include is 5 years. So I'll change that to 8 years. Okay. So I've got texture mean in lane here. So I'll find another texture parameter, the texture mean in left field path. Save. Okay. And then I've got rut mean lane average. I'll take rut max lane average for my other parameter. And I'll change years to include from 5 to 8 so that I can go up to 8 years. So you can save. Okay, it's saved. So I'll go here and go for normal zoom. And then I'll go and text rut 8 years. So you can see here you've got texture, 2 texture values, two texture parameters. One is mean in left wheel path and mean in lane, and rut mean lane average and rut average, rut max lane average as well. And that goes back 8 years. Okay, and what I'll do next is I'll quickly change one of the other ones so that I can show you how you can edit it. So I'll go here and I'll find my section again, parameter analysis. So I've got my existing 2 reports are rut mean left wheel path analysis and rut mean lane average analysis. So before I do anything here, let me show you how exactly that will look like. Let's say rut mean at left wheel path analysis. If I generate this, so it'll have 3 graphs where the first one is showing last 2 surveys raw data in a scatter plot where you can compare, is there any changes in the data? And this bar graph is showing the data breakdown in the last survey, which is basically puts into bins. For example, in this case, you're looking at less than or equal to 2.5, 2.5 to 5, 5 to 7.5, and so forth. and then trends in the past 10 years. It's 10 years. Yeah, past 10 years. Okay, so I'll change this to a different parameter. So track mean LWP analysis. Yeah, that's right. And then I will click on edit. I'll change this track mean left wheel path analysis to, let's say, what else we don't have here. Okay, we don't have a texture one. So I'll use texture mean in lane. Change the name to texture mean in lane. And the same thing here. And I wanted to change this number of years to only 5 years for my trend graph. Change here. So you can save. Yeah, go. So I've got my texture mean in lane analysis, which I've replaced the rat mean lane parameter with this. And I'll go and select my segment. Okay, what I'll do to change this for 15 kilometers, I'll change it to 1.5 kilometers. Okay, so now you can see clearly the difference of in the past two surveys, and this trend is showing only 5, and the breakdown of your last survey is completely different. Depends on texture mean data and also the segment I've selected. Okay, so that's a quick way of changing reports and creating reports in JunoViewer. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint slide again. So I hope you find this webinar useful, and we will do another webinar to go over more complex XML edit features in JunoViewer, where you can change reports in other areas, like for example, strip maps, including virtual and physical field inspection tools, and some other report areas as well. Thank you for listening. If you have any special requirements or complex queries you would like to use, please send us an email to support, and we will try our best to address them. Thank you, everyone, and you all enjoy your rest of your day.